Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Je m'appelle John Packer. Je suis le directeur du Centre de recherche et d'enseignement de droits de la personne à l'Université d'Ottawa. Je suis également un professeur de droit ici dans la faculté de droit à l'Université d'Ottawa. My name is John Packer. I'm the director of the Human Rights Research and Education Center, and I'm also a professor of law at the University of Ottawa. It's a great pleasure to host this webinar today. Let me say there are some special elements to it I'll mention in a moment. The topic is Crip time and the duty to accommodate. It's some preliminary findings from some important research. Some people weren't sure if it was Crip or Crips. No, it's not an LA gang. It's a problem of disability, persons with disabilities and use of time and the changing character of work. We're going to hear more about this in a moment. Let me say that the subject, of course, in changing times is especially important. But before I refer to that, let me, on behalf of the Human Rights Research and Education Center, acknowledge and affirm that our recognition that we are proceeding here, myself and Professor Malhotra and some others from the University of Ottawa, which is located on unceded and unsurrendered Indigenous land, a Anishinaabe environment, and we pay tribute to the knowledge keepers and those who make every effort to preserve the environment, and we recognize the importance of respecting that. So my main duty is to introduce my longtime colleague and esteemed colleague, Professor Ravi Malhotra, I'm sure is well known to many people, indeed one of Canada's leading, I would dare say amongst the leading disability rights and particularly disability and labor scholars and jurists. So let me, before doing that, just say one or two other words on the topic. It's summarized briefly in the materials that have been distributed, but I want to underline two elements. The first idea that unfortunately, despite the ever-increasing incidence or preponderance of persons with disabilities and kinds of disability throughout society, it does remain, this subject does remain far too often an afterthought or an add-on, instead of using the facts as an opportunity to reimagine how we approach work, relationships, and so forth. The second is that notions of accommodation, which are perhaps not best articulated so far, but are inadequate, and that's really the added value we're going to hear, I believe we're going to hear about, is how to reinterpret and a new theory of a duty to accommodate. Now, a few words about Professor Malhotra. I mentioned he's a longtime Human Rights Research and Education Center member, also a member of the Faculty of Law here, but he's also an alumnus, actually, of the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. So we're proud. We had a big celebration yesterday at the Supreme Court of Canada, at which we had incoming students, and I think people like Professor Malhotra are exemplars in showing that the possibilities that the profession offers. So we're proud that he's also an alumnus of the University of Ottawa. But in this specific case, he's the person really to lead on this. His doctoral dissertation specifically dealt with globalization for labor law in the context of workers with disabilities, so it can't be more on point. You probably know him through a lot of his publications, recent number of books, co-authored, co-edited, and so forth. So I won't go through them. It's a long list of impressive scholarly character. Professor Malhotra is a full professor in law. He holds a doctorate of law from the University of Toronto. He did a master's of law at Harvard, his first law degree here at the University of Ottawa, and studied before that at Carleton University, including a master's in international affairs or relations. He also has a practitioner background. He articled in a firm, specializes in labor issues, and he's lectured around the world. So I won't spend more time about Professor Malhotra. You can Google him if you don't already know him. But it's a real pleasure, and I'm so glad that we're able to have this session today. It's a real honor, in fact. So with that, I pass over to Ravi Malhotra, Professor Ravi Malhotra.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, John. I am aware that there's one person commenting in the chat about volume. I'm not sure if people are able to hear me clearly. I'm assuming you can hear me, but if that's not the case, we'll see what we can do. But without further ado, I've got a great presentation and panel for you. I'm so proud to have with me my research assistant, Julia Dobrowolski, who is a recent graduate of the University of Ottawa. And Julia and I have collaborated on this SSHRC-funded project. I want to acknowledge how grateful I am for SSHRC. And I'm also excited that we have a participant codenamed Yvette, who is also going to respond later. And I want to thank her for giving up a portion of her afternoon to spend with us. It's really because of participants that we have research. This is qualitative research about the experiences of people with disabilities, and we could not do it without participants. So I'm going to speak a little bit, then Julia is going to talk a little bit about some of the methodological aspects. Then I'm going to continue, and we'll turn it over to Yvette, followed by questions. So hopefully people are able to hear. And give me a second. Okay, so I'm also going to let you know that the work we did was conducted on unceded Algonquin territory, and the University of Ottawa is actively working towards reconciliation. We pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. So I'll be speaking in the English language today, and I want to begin by thanking our research partners who helped us obtain participants. They include the National Educational Association of Disabled Students, NEADS. I started off working at NEADS when I was a teenager, many decades ago, and since then I've had a long relationship with the organization, and I want to pay tribute to NEADS and their national coordinator, Frank Smith, who's been a tireless supporter of this project. Also, the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, CCD, Canada's leading cross-disability organization, and which I've had the pleasure of working with on the Human Rights Committee in the past for many years. And April Daubin and many others at CCD have been supporters of my work over the years. And before he retired, Mr. Laurie Beachell, many of you will know in the disability community, and also the Arch Disability Law Center, where Robert Latanzio and his colleagues have also been supportive. Every year, Robert, or many years, he travels to Ottawa or comes via Zoom to speak in my disability rights seminar. Even though he's running a legal clinic, he's an extremely busy man, but he generously gives up time. Before I move on, oftentimes not enough is said about research assistants. Without them, nothing would get done. So I have on this panel my colleague, Julia Dobrowolski, who's now a graduate of the University of Ottawa. Many other research assistants worked on this project, and I want to acknowledge them: Jacqueline Moiser, Emily Razik, Rebecca Folks, and Cheyenne Sami, who are either current or past law students. that worked on this project, and some of them have now graduated and gone on to make contributions in law, in articling, or indeed as lawyers. So I thank them for their work. Okay, so what are the research aims today? We're trying in this project to offer a reconceptualization of the role that time plays in the lives of people with disabilities and what insights it offers for formulating a new duty to accommodate. I want to stress that we're putting the preliminary into preliminary findings. These are tentative, these are at the beginning. I hope to do a book. I have a book contract with Bloomsbury Academic, but our gathering, our qualitative research, although it's sort of wrapping up, it's ongoing. So we're not at the end, we're beginning to piece things together. And I'm happy in Q&A to talk about some of the shortcomings. Qualitative research is not quantitative research. We only have so many participants, and Ms. Dobrowolski will be talking about some of the numbers, but we don't have thousands of participants. It's a select sample. So, people can talk about what generalizations can you make. Does it completely reflect all of Canadian society? Probably not. There's limitations on how you gather data. We probably have disproportionately highly educated people with physical disabilities, even though the praxis, the politics behind us, we'd love to have a wider range of disabilities / impairments. For sure, more people that are blue collar, more with learning disabilities. And I think this reflects how we recruited. We recruited from people that are more likely to self-identify, that are involved or know about disability organizations. And surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, we had a considerable number of lawyers that were respondents. I did not set out to take money from SSHRC and do a study of lawyers with disabilities. That's a different project. That's not what I intended, but they have disabilities. They wanted to participate, and we had a broad definition of both work and disability. It's very open-ended. So if you're wondering, when I read some of these anonymized quotations or some of these insights, bear in mind some of these biases, because quite a lot are disabilities. I don't want anybody to be left with the impression that, lawyering is the only profession where people with disabilities work. Obviously, that's definitely not the case. So some of these objectives are analyzing how the duty to accommodate workers with disabilities operates on the ground through the prism of Crip time. This idea is not my idea. I'm extremely clear about this, and I pay tribute to the founders, Ellen Samuels and Alison Kafer, that worked so hard and deserve all the credit in developing this concept. And what I mean by that is simply the idea that people with disabilities experience time in a different way, whether it's managing attendance services or paratransit bookings or the ability to work on a full-time basis. And for some people with disabilities, it's all of those things together, including, and I just gave some examples, including booking medical appointments. It might take a month to get an appointment with a physician. I know this because I just did this. So, physicians are backed up. It might be a month. That is Crip time when you're trying to navigate all these barriers. They're multifaceted. I'm saying this, and I'm a law professor. You can imagine for people that are struggling, many people with disabilities struggle with part-time employment and managing accommodations, which means less income, and many are not in the workforce at all. In this study, we focus on workers with disabilities, but we tried to use a broad, robust, inclusive definition of what it means to work. So some sort of paid work, and my colleague will talk a little bit more about this, but it was extremely wide-ranging. So we documented the lived experiences of private and public sector workers with disabilities in Ontario, and because of the magic of Zoom, I love Zoom, we were able to interview participants from across Ontario. And while I know that for some people with disabilities or impairments, Zoom presents certain barriers for some people, it's liberating for others in that sense. And I did an earlier project 15 years back and published it with a former student, now a partner at a major law firm, Morgan Rowe. We did the study. In those days, we actually went to coffee shops. We went out into the community and interviewed people. It's a whole lot easier, especially when you live in in Canada. I live in Ottawa. You try and interview people and it's 42 below. Well, a lot of times they're going to cancel simply because, well, it's hard for anybody, but it's particularly hard if you have a mobility impairment or if you have some sort of orientation challenge because of visual impairment. Zoom, in that sense, although I acknowledge fully it has barriers, it's also liberating. And so I'm really excited about Zoom as a challenge. And I'll talk about some of the difficulties. We did have, in a few cases, none of whose data presented here, people that were phony trying to scam our study. And, I talked extensively with the Research Ethics Board. That's one of these challenges of doing Zoom studies. People that I think were not even Canadian, that were just doing it for honoraria. But that's one of the challenges. And I believe firmly that the benefits of the valid data, the vast majority of what we're presenting today, outweigh the risks. So we also looked at how analyzing a standard conception of time presents opportunities and obstacles in the daily work life of persons with disabilities. And in addition to the book, I'm also, with former RAs, working on a few pieces that we have shopped out to law journals. And so that process is extremely slow. Someday, I expect they will be published, but publishing world, things take time. So, okay, so I already mentioned Ellen Samuels and Alison Kafer. I'm just going to read this beautiful quotation from a piece that Professor Samuels wrote in Disability Studies Quarterly. For Crip time is broken time. It requires us to break in our bodies and minds to new rhythms, new patterns of thinking and feeling and moving through the world. It forces us to take breaks, even when we don't want to, even when we want to keep going, to move ahead. It insists that we listen to our body minds so closely, so attentively, in a culture that tells us to divide the two and push the body away from us, while also pushing it beyond its limits. Crip time means listening to the broken languages of our bodies, translating them, honoring their words. That's Ellen Samuels. And so in the work, I came up with this idea that to distinguish what I call Crip time from above, which refers to structural barriers, like the whole idea of imposition of time. The time regulation imposes ways that a person can obtain a benefit. It's a strict rule that limits people, versus Crip time from below, which explores how disabled people transform conventional concepts of time. And so I really thought that it's important to make this distinction, and it's sort of my small contribution to this idea that when disabled people try to fight back, we should distinguish that from the impositions created by things like paratransit systems or attendance services. And so I think it's useful, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts on this idea of Crip time from above versus Crip time from below. And I'm certainly writing about this currently. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over now briefly to Ms. Dobrowolski, and she's going to say a little bit about data collection.
Great. So hello, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. I would just like to do a little preface that I actually am not from the legal community. I didn't graduate from Ottawa Law. I really came onto this study to help with the qualitative aspect. So that is my background, and I will be sharing with you some things that we did in terms of data collection and data analysis and the overall participant demographic. So starting off, to help recruit participants, we really leveraged the help from our three partners. So that's NEADS, CCD, and ARCH. We had sent them all recruitment posters with necessary information about the study and contact information about how to reach the team. The posters included things like eligibility criteria, which for this study we set participants must reside in Ontario between the ages of 18 and 65. They must be currently or recently employed. Either full-time or part-time would be okay. And they needed to self-identify as an individual with a disability. Now, we also included in the recruitment posters that participants would be compensated $25 as an honorarium for their research activities. So this would be either if they participated in a focus group or an individual interview. And participants were recruited on a first come, first served basis. So we actually had a really great kind of response from potential participants. And so we had to manage that with a online kind of tracking system that we set up with the research team. So just to kind of monitor when emails came in, and we would reach out to those individuals first, just so that it was fair for everybody. And so in total, we were able to conduct a total of 3 focus groups. 2 were for individuals that identified as males, and then 1 for women. And we conducted a total of 44 individual interviews. So all sessions, both the focus group and the individual interviews, were transcribed verbatim, recorded, and anonymized. And we also use pseudonyms in our study to help protect participant identity. So all participant names that you see later on in the quotes, those have been assigned, and those are not the real individuals' names that participated in the study. Yes, I think we're ready for the next slide, Professor Malhotra.
Give me a second.
And so this slide just kind of shows a nice all-encompassing overview of participant demographics. So as you can see, in total, with the focus groups and the individual interviews, we had a total of 49 unique participants in the study. Overall, we had 34 individuals who identified as women, 13 as men, and then 2 non-binary or polygendered. In total, 64 participants identified as Caucasian, 11% as Black, 8% as South Asian, and then you can see in the little chart there at the bottom, we have a few other, some smaller ratios as well. So I think it was about, let me just see here. Yeah, we also had some that were unknown, so whether they didn't disclose or we just weren't able to capture that information. So we had about 13% unknown, and then 4 as well that were Asian. And we'd like to just note that from the preliminary findings that racial discrimination is still prevalent in Ontario workplaces, as several of our racialized participants indicated that race affected their work and ability to get accommodation. So we just have a nice quote to kind of help back that up from Andrea. So this quote says, "I thought it was a disability issue, but my colleague said, Andrea, they see your Blackness before they see your disability." Perfect, and we're ready for the next slide.
Give me a second.
Perfect. Oh, just one too far.
Oh,
there we go. Thank you. So data analysis was done in a group effort between myself and some of the few other research assistants that were mentioned, of course, with Professor Malhotra overseeing everything. So data analysis was done using constant comparative methods, and it followed an inductive approach. Inductive approach meaning really that we chose to base our findings on what we were finding in the research. So we kind of didn't have any preliminary codes going into it or anything like that. We wanted to read the research first and see what stuck out to us, and that's how we formed our codes. So this kind of began by initial codes being applied. So myself actually and one of our earlier research assistants, Jacqueline, we read over some of the transcripts, and then we just individually noted things that stuck out to us, kind of created little notes of like what we think this could be useful for, and then we met and we were able to create a code list, and then we were able to take that code list and apply it to the rest of the data. And of course, code lists are flexible. So codes could be added or removed as more data became available, and we were able to be really flexible with how that was organized. But after a while, the code list does begin to stabilize naturally, and then you kind of use that code list to help organize, sort, and integrate the larger data set. So of course, we have 44 interviews, so that takes quite a bit. So using that initial code list, we were able to organize everything accordingly. And then you kind of create these larger themes. Now, to help with this, we use NVivo, which is a qualitative data analysis service, and that really helps to just keep all your data organized, and you're easily able to retrieve quotes and help in data management in general. And I would just like to point out that we started with focus groups, and they were complete first, just because we wanted to kind of get a general sense of what themes could be expected in the individual interviews, and to make sure that our interview protocols were set up accordingly. So we wanted to make sure that we were asking questions that were coming up in the focus groups to make sure that everything was relevant. And yeah, I think that's it from my end. I think I'll turn it back to you, Professor Malhotra.
Okay. Let's save. Ensure it's paused. Sorry about this. Just give me. Okay, so can you hear me now? People can hear me?
Yes, I think it's
okay.
just, it's not in slideshow view anymore, if you'd like to put it back to that.
Okay. Okay, pardon me. Give me a second. So just come back. Okay, so some of the major themes from our study. We don't have time to go through everything. Some of the selected ones are the accommodation processes, barriers, meeting expectations, stigma, underrepresentation, and time. So, there are many, many others, but those are sort of selected that I'm going to focus on here. Okay, so the accommodation process. Participants shared diverse experiences regarding accommodation processes in the workplace, showcasing both successes and challenges. Many highlighted the importance of flexible and responsive approaches to accommodation, emphasizing the need for tailored solutions to their specific needs. Some positive examples included supportive colleagues and managers who facilitated smooth accommodation processes, often through informal discussions and email follow-ups rather than formal paperwork. However, some participants faced obstacles such as bureaucratic delays, outdated equipment, and a lack of understanding from management. Instances of pushback or inadequate accommodations were also noted, with participants recounting instances where the requests were initially denied or improperly implemented. Okay, so then we have some examples of voices. I would much prefer to move away from a disability-centric model of accommodation and one more to a worker-centric model, which would recognize that some disabilities are temporary and some are episodic in nature. I think that discussion needs to be ongoing. That's codename Nolan. Blake said, a lot of accommodations I would describe as very flexible and informal. We didn't really go through an official accommodation process that was documented. It kind of would say the help of the union or HR. It was very much done between myself and my manager at the time, or managers. And I think, largely it was because my disability is very obvious. I'm a person with muscular dystrophy, and so my limitations are many of them. The physical limitations are quite visible and not contentious. So I wasn't really required, or they didn't ask me to kind of produce doctor's notes to justify anything. It was very much done on an informal basis. Okay, another theme is barriers. So one significant challenge is the uncertainty surrounding accommodations, with many interviewees expressing difficulty in identifying and requesting appropriate supports due to the episodic or situational nature of their disabilities. Workplace dynamics presented obstacles, including biases, a lack of understanding, and hesitancy from colleagues and management to provide necessary supports. Technological accessibility issues further compounded the challenges, with some interviewees noting compatibility issues with software and a lack of awareness among colleagues regarding accessibility needs. Participants expressed frustration with the inadequacy of transportation services, citing issues with paratransit systems, door-to-door transit for people with physical disabilities, if you're not familiar with the term paratransit, and the financial burden of alternative options such as ride-sharing services. So here we have some quotations on barriers. Valerie said, they don't have the empathy. I think they was exactly like them. They'd have more, if I was exactly like them, they'd have more empathy. But for whatever reason, because they don't have the exposure or whatever the case is, they don't have as much empathy because the disability is not related to anything they've experienced. Morris remarks, where I have time and again proven that I'm able of working and that I have brought advantages, and yet not a single one of my interviews has landed fruition. I've not landed up a single growth role in my current employment. Why is that? Why is that everybody who joined X company after me today sits promoted to the next level while I can't seem to get myself to it? Why do I always fail the interview? What am I missing? Then there's a discussion of meeting expectations. Participants frequently highlighted the notion of individuals with disabilities struggling to meet the expectations of able-bodied individuals in the workplace. Across various industries, participants described the pressure to conform to standard work hours and practices despite physical impairments, leading to health issues and burnout. There was a recurring narrative of social integration challenges and the difficulty of fitting into professional environments due to disability-related barriers. Issues such as punctuality and start times were highlighted as particularly challenging, reflecting the rigid expectations faced by individuals with disabilities. So here we have some quotations as well, Blake comments. I think that's something that managers of lawyers thrive on, is that lawyers are competitive and that they compare themselves. And so when you see your peers working into the evening, you want to do that too. There was certainly never a shortage of work. I was limited by how much I could do functionally and to be well. And that was always a very difficult line to draw. It's very challenging. Like I lost a lot of weight, wasn't eating properly, those kinds of things. It was difficult for me to maintain my health while also kind of functioning at a high level. Rosemary comments, an employer wants someone that they can get peak productivity out of. They want people that have like optimal functioning. And you want someone who's high functioning, high performing, that you can get as much like product out of. And so if you're dealing with someone who's low functioning or has impaired functioning or has some type of disabled functioning, the concept of like productivity and how much you can get out of an employee, right? This is the capitalist mode for productivity, does not really make room for people with disabilities to have different levels of functioning. It does not. Okay, then we looked at stigma, another theme in our study. There was a lack of dignity in many areas, particularly associated with the use of paratransit services, a reluctance to disclose impairments to avoid bullying and harassment, and there were concerns over being seen as unproductive, disability stigma, stereotyping of people with disabilities. So Jessica comments, there were many interviews I went into, and even before the interview started, I knew that it was over. It's the way they will look at me. Monica commented, I think there's a stigma in some communities of identifying as a person with a disability. So if you're an employee and maybe you have an invisible disability and you're racialized, you're probably not going to come out and say, I'm disabled because there's a stigma. Underrepresentation was yet another theme. There was uncertainty about accommodations that fed into an unwillingness to hire, or at least that's how our participants perceived it. This is compounded by intersectional dimensions of race and gender. And we did ask about those questions. We did also ask questions about sexual identity, but I think they came up less frequently. So Blake comments, what I found was I started interviewing with firms. You know, everybody's very nice and it's all collegial. And when you're in the interview, it's great. But you can kind of see the look of consternation on their faces of how a person in the wheelchair with a severe disability fits into articling culture. Like, is this person going to be building binders for me? Are they going to be working 14, 15 hours a day or doing all the things articling students typically have to do to progress. It's become very clear to me that while they may like me in the room, I was not getting any kind of offers because I don't know that the law firms really knew what to do with me. And so for those of you that are not lawyers, articling is the compulsory apprenticeship that law graduates need to do, kind of like a medical internship, in order to be a member of the bar. Monica says, I don't know if I had any role models back in the day. And sadly for me right now, I've been told that I'm a role model. And I'm like, I don't want to be a role model. Sadly, in that I'm thinking there should not be more than one of me. There should be several role models. Then we come to the theme, of course, of time, which I'm writing a book about on this whole notion of Crip time using this philosopher, Castoriadis. So on time, participants consistently highlighted the challenges they face in managing their time effectively due to the demands imposed by their disabilities. Systemic barriers impede individuals with disabilities from accessing equal opportunities, quality of life. Participants consistently emphasize the need for additional time allowances to fulfill tasks effectively, reflecting a fundamental need for accommodation. And for anybody who's wondering, sometimes we have used disability and impairment interchangeably, but I'm well aware, when I say disabilities, like in the first prong of the slide, I'm typically talking about impairment. And of course, when we refer to barriers, we're talking about disability. So here are some voices or quotations on this topic of time. Brandon says, so I feel like employers, and this could be kind of an extreme way of looking at it, employers should compensate people for the time. Because if I have a new database to use, right, I have to learn it with my jaws, right? That's taking time out. Sometimes even your personal time just to do the job. So either really good training and the opportunity to have a professional to ask these questions on how to do it quicker, or compensation for your time on how to figure it out. Harmony says, I guess for me, I would think about that, okay? It's going to take me longer to do most tasks because I have chronic pain, or it's going to take me longer to do something because I have ADHD. So I need to maybe go over my work a couple of times to double check it. So if I had to use time in that way, it's like, this sounds awful, but it's like, okay, the regular person, we know the average person takes them this much time, but we're going to accommodate because we know this person with ADHD or the skin disorder needs 1.5 times the amount of time to complete the task. Jenna said, I think for me, when it comes to time, I think time should also be an accommodation. Just the same way we talk about having an automatic door, then time should also be an accommodation as well. For me, I think that because when it comes to time, people with disabilities need some extra time just to complete a task. Okay, so those are just some of the findings. I can go on and on and on, but I want to leave time for our last speaker, who is a participant codenamed Yvette. And I'll just conclude by saying that we're going to be producing something to distribute for our research partners and our participants. So that would be NEADS, CCD, and the Legal Center. I'm working on a book about the duty to accommodate, Crip time, and the French philosopher Castoriadis. And in the question period, if you want to know more about Castoriadis and his theory of social imaginary significations, I'm happy to talk to you about that and suggest some places where you can learn more. And as I said, we are publishing in various law journals. I'm doing that with some of my research assistants that have moved on, but that takes time. So, I think that concludes what I have to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Yvette for the next 15 minutes or so.
Okay, so I participated in this project, and I can share some of my experiences, employment experiences related to accommodation and time. I think I want to, I think that time from above, if you want to quote it that way, that what takes time for me is usually due to the structural barriers that I face as a blind person. So I feel that, of course, it would take less time if I didn't have to struggle with, inaccessible documents, inaccessible websites, or communication barriers, due to either the way the technology is set up or the way the communication is limited to one way only. So I really like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities definition of disability, how it's that interaction between the person's own sort of functional limitation, impairment, if you want to use that word, and the environment, the barriers that exist. So sure, I can work really fast, but it's in dealing with filling out forms, online forms, accessing information that's so inaccessible that often takes time for me. I also want to think about or have people think about that it's not like when we approach work and having having workers work at that optimum level, sometimes it's not speed, right? Like you can be really fast and make lots of mistakes or even make the wrong decisions. And I've seen able-bodied people do that, right? And I have been constantly told to slow down, think about, reflect, examine, gather data before I, go to my next step in my project. So there is value in taking the time, and I think people with disabilities bring that kind of that good compelling reason to say we don't have to run so fast, we don't have to act right away, perhaps taking the time because we need to, but also that extra time would help the rest of us to consider what else is needed, the pros and cons. So I just want to say that slowing down is not, people have to realize that able-bodied people, people with no disabilities, they need to slow down. Not that we need to always speed up, that slowing down is an asset sometimes. I also want to say that I like that flexibility part that you mentioned, right? That a lot of accommodations is not the standard way, filling out this massive medical documentation. What can you do? What can you not do? Because everybody is different. And even having physicians, fill out those forms, they don't live your lives. They don't live my life. So how do they know that what I can truly do and not do? So this sort of official bureaucratic form filling, procedure, sometimes it's not the most efficient, if you want to talk about time, that just talking it out with my manager and constantly getting feedback and discuss, what's the best way to do something as a team really matters, really helps, right? There's no form filling. We just have that understanding that Yvette is not going to be the one running around doing this and that. Another person is best at that, but Yvette is better at developing the document, because that's my strength. So looking at people's strengths and understanding that not all people with disabilities need more time on everything, right? So we need more time on this aspect of work, but we could be very punctual or fast in another aspect of work. And that's the same way with able-bodied people. Some able-bodied people, they're really quick in doing something, but slower, takes more time. So there's that diversity of all our abilities. And I would say because I'm blind, I use JAWS, the screen reading software. Boy, can I read through a long document fast, faster than anybody else. And if I know the key commands, I can do certain things faster than a sighted person looking around says, where's that place where I can click? So it really depends on the task. So it's not that we have to inform people that we are not all alike. Some people are really good with getting from A to B. Other people take more time. And of course, paratransit, as mentioned, makes a big difference. You know, is the paratransit system good in your city or not? And what kind of supports you have. Some people have great supports, get things done really well. Others are really, you know, they're on their own. They don't have support persons coming to them and helping them. I guess that stigma, because I'm also Asian, right, and female, and compounded with my disability of being blind, I don't know when there's discrimination. Is that because I'm a woman? You're bullying me because I'm a woman? Because I'm Asian? Or because I'm blind? So we have to, we meaning people with disabilities with, you know, sort of that intersectionality of race and gender. Sometimes that stress of having to deal with barriers, but not understanding why, you know, the cause of the barriers. And I think that taking extra time on our own to work overtime or more than the sort of 7.5 or 8 hours a day, just to make up, you know, for our own the time that we need. So that often it really does happen, especially at the beginning of a new job. I work way more than my regular 8 hours because I said, okay, you know, I want to show my employer that I'm productive, that I get things done, right? However, that's not sustainable. So I think there are always times for even able-bodied people to work overtime. So there are times where we do need to work overtime to make up for the extra time that we ourselves take due to our disabilities. But I think a healthier approach, a sustainable approach, is also to have that discussion. And of course, it depends on your manager, how open they are to say, hey, you know, for this project, for this task, I think I would need more time. How about, you know, let's manage our expectations of each other. But then there, like I said, it's not always that way. Other tasks, other situations, I can get this done way faster. So just having that ongoing discussion. And I think this is no different from working with able-bodied people. So basically, I just want to end by saying that people with disabilities, the minute we show up, people think accommodation. Oh, what accommodation do they need? Or how much is it going to cost us? How much time are they going to, extra time they need? I think the attitude should be when you meet someone with a disability, the first thing that we should think about is what accessible features, what accessible structures we should set up. The onus is on the employer. Of course, they don't think that way, but like one colleague really well described to me, accessibility and accommodations, two sides of the same coin. The more accessible your workplace is, your communication system is, the less accommodation we need. The less accessible the workplace is, the more accommodation we need. So if you're saying, hey, people with disabilities are just requiring too much accommodation, too much time, too much money, well, perhaps it's an indication that the workplace has a lot of accessibility gaps. So I want to put the onus or share the onus of accessibility / accommodation with the employer, with everybody. If we were, as one of the participants mentioned in the quote, that if there's an environment, a work environment where we all understand we're working together, we help each other, we support each other, and not looking at just this person has a disability, that person doesn't. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. Then we're not talking about accommodation anymore. We're talking about how we complement each other. So I like to normalize accessibility, if you want to call it, or just decrease the emphasis on accommodation, but put the emphasis back on accessibility. Anyways, I could go on, but I'll stop here.
Okay, well, that was absolutely stunning presentation from Yvette, I think really summarized the principles, and we didn't know what she was going to say in advance. We didn't coordinate this. That was just incredible. It's like she read our minds. So I want to thank Yvette for taking her time out of her busy day. And now I guess, shall we then discuss some of the Q&As that are already there? I think saying so. Okay, so there's a question, and I'll not doing these in order, but there's one that says, as a person with a psychosocial disability, I can relate to what Yvette lives about Crip time, but at the same time, Crip time takes different forms in my life, and that could be specific to psychosocial disabilities. And so, speaking for myself, absolutely, and I think I alluded to earlier, I wish we had a broader range of experiences in the participants, who our numbers are in the low 40s. If we had billions of dollars in funding, I'd interview thousands of people. When you have a study like this, it tends to be selective, and unfortunately, certain kinds of people are disproportionately represented. I would love to have had more people with mental health disabilities, more people with learning disabilities. In our study, there were a lot of people who are blind and who have physical disabilities that were represented. And I think that represents the organizations we partnered with, and how we determined how we went about recruitment. It determines what we did. So just going, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but Yvette, if you want to just comment.
No, I totally understand. People with so-called invisible, disabilities or mental health and neurodiversity, they face different challenges from me. But I still say, sometimes they do certain things way faster than me. So I think I want to look at their strengths, emphasize our strengths.
Right. I appreciate that. So there's a question about race in the study, and again, we did do everything we could to get people. Someone's asked a question about why it is we don't have more racial minorities, and again, I think it reflects where we got our participants, and so certainly this was an Ontario-wide study, and some places are more diverse than others. Maybe had we partnered with different organizations, we would have got more. But I think that there's certainly significant diversity in terms of sexual orientation or sexual identity in the study. There's a question about, did you find tools, resources to explain Crip time to disability management workers? Do you have any recommendations on how to socialize disability management workers and labor relations who push back on providing accommodations? And so that's a great question. And, and I think that going forward, that's definitely something, as I said, it's preliminary. Going forward, we're definitely going to consider things like that in terms of policy proposals. What is it we can do? One of the ideas certainly that we're tinkering with in the published work in law journals that I talked about is, how could you redesign social programs so that they're more flexible when it comes to part-time workers? Now, you might say that's non-responsive to the question. This question was specifically about how do you educate managers? And that's also an issue. Off the top of my head, I think a lot of it's going to depend on the sector. It's a little bit easier, I think, in the unionized sector. I teach labor law. Most Canadians don't have a union. When you do have a union, there's also a role in educating the union. So we did ask questions about how active people's unions were on disability issues. In many cases, I think participants typically didn't know. And as I said, what we presented today in the short presentation is only selected themes, on this. I don't know if Julie, you wanted to jump in on any of the questions on diversity, or you get anything to add?
I just want to make sure that we don't forget the one question that was asked earlier by a participant about why certain participants could get overlooked for promotion. Someone asked specifically, wondering what your participants gave as reasons for their inability to get promoted alongside their non-disabled counterparts. So I can briefly just speak to that. I think, in a sense, when they were discussing this with us, they were just kind of noting things that they saw, not per se giving specific reasonings on why they didn't think they were promoted. But some things that came up were, for example, they felt that they were overlooked on certain projects, like they would be brought on, and then when it was time to kind of go to the next step, it would get passed on to someone else. So things like that, or just getting kind of overlooked in meetings, like team meetings, perhaps not getting their voice heard. So just kind of small things like that, I think, added to the bigger picture of, them seeing, okay, well, everybody else is getting promoted, but I'm not. Are these the reasons? That kind of thing.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I have a participant, and I swear I did not plant this participant, but this participant asks a question that I'm actually working on. It's the exact thing I'm working on. This person asks, can you draw any parallels between the right to disconnect and Crip time? And so if you're not familiar, the whole idea, and you'll see this in people's signature files. I see this at work. My response time may not be my working hours may not be your working hours. You'll see that's more and more commonly now. And that's because some jurisdictions have legislation, or at least I think that's influenced that. May not be the direct reason about requiring employers to give a right to disconnect. And that's definitely something that I think is a problem and also an issue that Crip time from below can address. So, in the legal community, we talked about this infamous law firm that got roasted in the media because somebody had leaked one of their managerial sessions, and this was either a partner or an associate. I think it was a very pugnacious associate that was actually telling first-year associates how they should live their life. And they were saying, you're on call 24/7, no exceptions, no excuses. That's not me being polemical. That's literally what this person said to new lawyers coming into the firm in the United States. And this person leaked this, junior lawyers leaked it to the media, and it got a ton of attention because it's everything that we're trying to move against advocates of work-life balance and specifically Crip time. I see some questions again about pushback from HR and how do you deal with that? So and I think that's very important. And and one of the things we're going to, I think, explore going forward. Okay, some of these are comments. Again, somebody is saying or commenting, in the past few years, we'd have a chance to review how we work as a society. And it is this information, this research is so important, as it felt like people with disabilities were very much left out of the conversation. Accessibility by design is crucial. And so here we've tried to include people with disabilities. And so one of the things we've done is try to incorporate. That's why we have a participant. And when people gave transcripts, we gave them, and I think Julia talked about this, that, we gave them a chance to review, make sure that our transcription is accurate, try to include their voice as much as possible. I know I'm conscious of the time, just reading this. It's become commonplace for hiring committees and managers conducting interviews to tell a potential candidate what the hybrid work arrangement is, and then ask if they're willing to abide by it 3 days a week. Certainly post-COVID, that's become a norm. This forces people with accommodations to out themselves during the interview process, which can lead to discrimination, whether intentional or not. And certainly this whole business of outing is very important. Many people don't want to disclose. And I think the solution to that is having more inclusive workplaces generally. And you'll see that we did not talk in this 1 hour about the implications of COVID, but that's certainly a theme that came up. And there is a battle right now between unions and management in the public sector about return to work. it'll be interesting to see how it's going to play out. And I can't give a prediction on that. My impression is a lot of private sector employers have already forced people back to work. But I think this business of outing is to have universal design, that you make it inclusive for everyone, and that if you do it that way and you have a flexible arrangement that isn't stigmatized, then it wouldn't necessarily be the case that people are forced to out themselves. And the shift post-COVID may make it more inclusive to all. But I'm going to turn it over for if there are any final remarks from Julia or Yvette. Otherwise, I think I'm going to have to say thank you to all our participants, not just Yvette, the dozens that participated in our study, and thank you, the panel audience, for coming out. We tried to speak as loudly as possible. I hope it's been inclusive. We welcome your comments, and I hope that we'll have future opportunities to discuss Crip time, this concept that was built by Ellen Samuels, Alison Kafer, that I've tried to work with, develop it in the context of workers with disabilities. Merci à tous et à toutes. C'était un plaisir d'avoir l'opportunité de parler avec vous cet après-midi. Julia, did you want to add anything?
No, just once again, thanks everybody for coming out, and thanks Yvette for your very nice presentation.
Did you want to add anything, Yvette?
No, just want to say that, thank you for this opportunity. And I just want to say that we just constantly speak up. I know people with disabilities, sometimes we're always afraid of being stigmatized, but I think learning to speak up in a positive, affirming way is something that I think would help ourselves. Thanks.
Perhaps I'll just add one word. I see in the questions, some people asking for contact information. Just to let everyone know that Professor Malhotra, his bio is available on the University of Ottawa website. You can just Google him, and that includes contact information, including his email. So if people wish to follow up, but also please watch this space because, or follow this space, because we will post, we have recorded this session and we will post material in follow-up on our website. I think that might also include the PowerPoint presentation. We will do our best to make it available. But there should be no difficulty in making contacts. I'm sure that Professor Malhotra would be more than happy to assist.
If I might just add one last comment and then happy to conclude. There was one last question. Who would be the best health professional to help people with disabilities to deal with Crip time? Would it be a good thing if occupational therapists help people about Crip time? So people with disabilities are their experts, but absolutely we need allies. And I was cross-appointed in rehabilitation sciences for some years. I've worked with occupational therapists. I've worked with the Canadian Association of Occupational Therapy, and I'm a huge fan of occupational therapy. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that participant because I think that would be absolutely valuable. And I'm going to close there and say goodbye.
Thank you to
Bye.
everyone. Thanks to the presentation. Take care.